Hi, and welcome to the Mid-Level Exceptional Sport Business Podcast. My name is Joe Isi. I'm your host. And as usual, this is our opportunity to talk with exceptional individuals in the sport industry who are moving our business forward. Today, I'm fortunate to be joined by German Montero. He is the Senior Director of Premium Sales and Service with the Denver Broncos. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, German.
Oh, thank you, Joe. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. So we've known each other for a little while now. But I usually like to let my guests tell their own story and share their own background. So let's go ahead and turn things over to you first and foremost. Tell us a little bit more about your career journey and your process to get to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started actually in college as an electrical engineering major, and that 3 semesters in, I was like, this is not what I want to do the rest of my life. And I always enjoyed sports. Didn't realize that there was a career in it. While I was in school, I was able to land some internships that showed me that that's the path I wanted to follow. And right out of school, as you know, sales is the one position that is available most of the time. So I was able to land a job with the Chicago Fire selling tickets and inside sales, which it was good for me to get that experience. I'm naturally very shy, so not sales is not what I would have thought would have been my career. But once I made my first sale, I was kind of addicted. I did take an internship in advertising after that, just to see if that's what I wanted to do. And all it did was confirm my passion for sales. And after that, I kind of had gone through the teams in Chicago, which is kind of where I grew up. So I moved to Tampa. I was an account executive with the Buccaneers for about 5 seasons. And then from there, I was able to transition to management with Madison Square Garden, where I was for almost 5 years. Started as the inside sales manager, transitioned to oversee the account executive team, and then made the move to the Brooklyn Nets, where I started as the director of membership sales, and then now over here with the Broncos, overseeing their suite sales team.
It's quite a journey. You've been a little bit of all over the place.
Yes, it's been interesting when I realized I wanted to work in sport, and I realized what the industry was like. I realized I might have to move, and if I would have at the time, I wanted to stay in Tampa, but there just weren't any roles open, and I had already been there 5 years. And especially in the NFL, it's one of those things where once you get one of those roles, you just can kind of continue to move up, and it's a little bit of a slower pace in terms of your growth. It's nothing bad. It's just the nature of the beast. So I made the decision that I was going to prioritize my career growth at that point. And when I felt that I was ready to take the next role, if it wasn't where I was, then I'd figure out where I have to go.
So I want to dig a little bit more into that process. Like, as you moved around, as you looked for that next opportunity, what did you prioritize in terms of, obviously it wasn't just about title, right?
Mm-hmm.
What were you looking for, and what have you continued to look for in those next opportunities, those next roles, next markets, next teams?
Yeah, it was a combination of a lot of things, obviously. I think that the biggest thing for me was being careful about who my leadership team was going to be. And I learned that early in my career. If it wasn't for the fantastic leaders I've had an opportunity to work under, that took a chance on me, that were patient with me, that coached me through mistakes and helped me learn, I wouldn't be here. So I learned early in my career that choosing the leader was more important than, to your point, the title and the logo, I guess, if you will, in the city. Obviously, as you go up higher, then you have a little bit more choice in that. But as I was going through starting into the management route, I really cared about who my leader was, and then also what my responsibilities were going to be. I wanted it to be somewhere where I was going to learn and get better.
Awesome. And obviously, as you continue to move up, you get more exposure, so you have a better idea of different people's leadership style, how they approach things in the culture that they're building.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So going back now to early on in your career, those first few sales with the Chicago Fire, or your time as an AE in Tampa Bay, what are some of the things that you did that you feel set yourself that set you apart from other people who may have been on your sales team or positioned you to be able to continue to grow and move up?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, initially, I didn't stand out at all. I was kind of middle of the board. I did well in inside sales. And then when I got to an AE, I I remember my first performance review, and I'll be thankful for this forever. It's gonna sound a little bad, but my manager told me that I had a mediocre year, and I walked out of that meeting. I was like, I do not want to hear that again. But I also started thinking about like what I wanted for my career, and I realized I wasn't committed enough to get what I wanted out of the career. So I think that was a good learning experience for me. Could I have gotten where I am faster? Probably, but I wouldn't have learned the lessons, and I use that too in my leadership when I'm coaching, because I went through it, right? Like I went through I don't know what it takes to get to that next level, to really stand out, to be the top performer. And it takes a lot more than just being good and talented. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of commitment. It takes a lot of sacrifice. So once I learned that, I think for me it was just being consistent every day, day in, day out, right? Um, Knowing that I had to come in, I had to execute XYZ, whether it was like prospecting in the morning every day, coming in maybe a little bit earlier before my teammates came in so I could get, some of the business journal leads. I worked in a team that was very, very competitive when it came to that. So like if you weren't in the office by like 7:30 and you check the business journal that day, all of the leads had been called. And so, making sure that I was doing those extra things, and I was doing them all the time, right? Like not just, oh, I'm gonna do it this week and not do it. It was consistently, like, as a salesperson, you're never gonna get rid of bad days. But if I was averaging a bad day a week, I want it to be a bad day every 2 weeks, and a bad day every month, and a bad day every 2 months. Be as consistent as possible, and that led to me becoming a top performer. Not because I was doing anything different than some of my teammates, I was just doing more of it.
I think you hit on a lot there, Ramon, that I want to really make sure we're pulling out. Um, it's the hard work, the work that you put in, and that you whether it's things that you're seeing your teammates do or that you're already doing, um, that you have to be able to do to continue to build on the talent that you've already had. If you've had a successful inside sales career, if you've had a strong start to your career, you have the fundamentals. But it's like going from college to the NBA, right? Or look at the rookies in the NFL this year, right? You've got great talent, you've got great potential, but what are you doing to be able to continue to build on that and to continue to make sure that that's not your ceiling?
Yeah.
Be able to reach that ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things as you start your career is surround yourself with A players, right? And I think that's what I did when I got to Tampa, and then my second and third year, I made sure that I was spending a lot of time with the top performers, and seeing what they were doing, and then literally just copying whatever they were doing. They were coming in on Saturday and doing appointments. Great, I'll come in on Saturday and do appointments. They're staying till 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. Cool, I'll do the same thing. I would just copy what they were doing, and then obviously eventually it became what I did too, right? But it was having a good example from some of those more tenured and more successful people than me at the time was super important. It's really hard to do that by yourself, and I think in sales, it can be, salespeople, sometimes we happen to be proud and we want to do it on our own, but having teammates that are going to support you and that are going to call you out when you're not doing the right things, that was super important to me. And I still, talk to those people now that I sold with, 7 years ago. And we're really close because we went through that together, and we built that bond, and we got better together, and we grew together. And that, without that, there's no way I could have made it without those teammates supporting me and teaching me and then challenging me to be a better version of myself.
And that goes back to what you were saying about leadership before, right? You're not only looking for the individual who's going to be your direct supervisor, but what kind of a team are you stepping into? What kind of an atmosphere, what kind of a culture are you going to be joining? Are you joining a team of 8 players where they're going to be able to help your growth, or are you joining a team where you're going to be kind of the standout rock star first day in, and their habits are going to start being a detriment to what you're trying to get done yourself.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's funny because like I think I've experienced both, and they both have their pros and cons, right? When you are in a team where everybody's really good and really talented and they do all the right things, it's harder to stand out. To your point, you could be really good, but it's harder to stand out. But you get better much faster. And if you're in a team where you're just the best person, um, then you're gonna stand out and probably grow faster, but you might not learn as much. And I think in that second scenario, it's hard because you don't know what you're not learning. That's a challenge when you don't know. I'm missing this part because nobody else kind of knows it around me. So I think I'm doing really well, but I might be missing a key component that I'm gonna need later in my career.
And
I
you've
don't
really got
know.
to be self-driven and self-motivated to go out there and find it.
Correct.
Yeah. And the other piece that you mentioned before, in addition to that hard work and work ethic is the consistency in delivering it, right?
Mhm.
It can't just be having a good day a week. It can't just be having one good month a year. It's the day in, day out commitment to doing these things that builds good habits,
Mhm.
that becomes the foundation to a great year in, year out, month by month, week by week. And you don't even realize that it's happening at first.
Yep,
But before you
100%.
know it, it's just you've built it into your routine, and that's your process. And that's the thing I think for folks who are like you and I as leaders, we'd love to see other people find that click moment where
Mhm.
they're working really hard to build these habits, then all of a sudden it automates for them.
Yep, I was actually about to use that exact same word. It just clicks at one point after you do it so much, it becomes automatic, and to your point, you don't realize that it's happening. But it requires patience. And I think in the last few years, things have changed in the market, and the expectations of employees have changed, and I think that's missing a little bit sometimes, that patience to understand that like it takes some time to get really good at something.
Mhm.
It takes longer that sometimes people are willing to give it time.
Yeah, 100%. And I you know, I've got 3 kids, and you've seen it in my 10-year-old. He picks up a bike, or he picks up a basketball, and he's frustrated that he can't make a 3-point shot right away. Like, no, you
Yep.
got to start with the layups, and then you work your way back.
Yep.
So, at this point in your career, you've obviously grown a lot. You've gone on a journey all across the country, multiple teams, multiple leagues. The perspective that you have today, what does success mean, or what does success look like to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think success is honestly pretty subjective to each person, right? So I think when I look at success is accomplishing one's goals, and those goals should align with whatever makes you happy, which it wasn't always the case with me. I always thought that success was always going to be having a good career, making money, and I would say over the last few years after I got married, and I'm planning things with my wife, planning our future, like my priorities have shifted, and my goals have shifted, and they're not all professional now. And I realized that I had to like dial back what I was doing. Not that I'm working less hard, I'm just being smart about how I work now, because I would work almost every weekend when I sold, and I would stay way later and not spend time with my then girlfriend, right? So that's had to change. So I have to, how do I become better at work? How do I produce more in less time, so that production's not suffering, but I have more time to spend with my wife and do the things that we want to do, and build a life that we want to build. So I think it's accomplishing your goals and making sure that those goals always line up with what makes you happy.
And as I think as individuals, as we change and grow over time, what makes us happy changes, right?
Hmm.
I think that's a great point and a great perspective to put on that. I want to touch on a little bit more too. You were talking about not working less hard, but being more efficient, being smarter with what we're doing. And I think the other benefit that has, in addition to allowing you to focus on being with your family, it allows you to not burn out,
Mhm,
right? Like, how long can somebody last in this industry if you're working 60 hours a week, if you're at every game
mhm,
and staying 2 hours after each game, and then coming in the next morning at 7:30 and working every weekend? It's a lot, right?
mhm,
And that passion that you come in with, it's hard for that to last if you're committing that much time to it. So by allowing yourself to dial it back a little bit while you increase the efficiency,
mhm.
allows you to stay in this position where you're still super passionate, you're still super excited about what you do, while maintaining a level of health and sanity.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's funny because the conversation of work-life balance, obviously it's come to the forefront and nowadays and the way I look at it is work-life balance doesn't mean that you work 50% of the time and are have leisure time 50% of the time. To me is, if you need to put in 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours one day, great. So you got to put in the 12 hours. But when you're not working, then you're not working. You can disconnect.
Mhm.
And there's sometimes, and especially in sports, right? Like we all know what we signed up for. When the season's going, you're probably gonna be working 65, 70% of the time, right? And you just have to make sure you commit to that. But then in the off season, make sure that you take your vacations and make sure that you're able to disconnect. And that's how you kind of keep that balance to your point so that you don't get burned out,
Yeah.
so you have stuff to look forward to, at the end of the season or whatever it is. So it's understanding what that balance is. But I've definitely had to create some of those boundaries that when I'm out of the office, unless it's like an emergency, I'm
Mhm.
anything that, like, if I can reply to you the next morning, then that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Because it is it affects your mental health, and I've definitely been affected by that in the past.
So pivoting a little bit, and looking at your background and your journey to today, you've been in baseball, you've been in the NBA, the NFL at different levels. From a seller's perspective, what is the difference between the leagues?
I would say the biggest difference is the off seasons and the amount of games, right? So you have baseball have very short of season, a lot of games. NBA is kind of in the middle, and the NFL's just a 10 game season with a really long off season. Obviously, most of my time I spent is selling in the NFL, but obviously I was very close to salespeople when I was working in the NBA, and I worked NBA NHL at the same time. So it obviously that affects it a little bit too, but I think the biggest difference as a seller is that there's more what people like to call slow time, especially in the NFL. And at that point, that's actually when you have to work the hardest, right? Super Bowl ends, you're working for a team that didn't even sniff the playoffs, and you're calling people in February, and they're telling you like literally the Super Bowl just ended. You want me to buy season tickets for August? And that's where you really have to put in the work. Like June in the NFL is also really dead, right? So there's that longer off season makes it so that one, you should plan more, right? But it makes it a lot harder because it's there's nothing going on that's driving demand outside of like tentpole moments like the draft and things like that.
Or trading for Russell Wilson?
Right, right, right. And then in the NBA, it's a little bit shorter, obviously. So and it seems like the NBA is always in the forefront with like player rumors and stuff like that. So there's always things that are happening that can create some more of that demand that's natural, where you can send a marketing email that taking advantage of X thing that just happened, or rumors and things like that. So I think that's the biggest difference. I mean, from a day-to-day perspective, it really doesn't change. It's just understanding how you're gonna plan your year out, and where you're really gonna have to put your foot to the gas pedal more when you don't have help from anything outside or from the news or from ESPN.
And that's a great point. Herman, just going back to what you talked about before, with work ethic and the time that you're putting in, I've always found that the people who can drive themselves are the ones who are going to be the most successful in the off season. And that's when you set your foundation for
Mhm.
success in the year. If you wait until the season starts, you're playing catch up all year long. But if you can push yourself and drive your own urgency, then you can build a strong foundation during the off season, the summer, winter, whatever it is, right? And then set yourself up for success the rest of the year. But that doesn't happen unless you can self-motivate and self-drive that, as soon as the championship game ends.
Right.
So you talked about a little bit from a seller's perspective. From a leader's perspective, what's the difference between the leagues?
I think the biggest thing is the execution of strategy and the planning, right? Like, I mean, leading people, I don't think it changes, right? Like, you're gonna stick to your core values and what you're teaching your team and what your expectations are. Like, I don't think that changes when it comes to leading an actual team. But from a strategy standpoint, again, I worked NHL and NBA at the same time, so maybe I'm it's a little my perspective might be a little different, but when you have so many games, right, you could go a quarter of the season and completely pivot on something that's very big, on a big initiative. You might just pivot, or on a big strategy that you had planned because it just wasn't working. In the NFL, one, you have more time to plan, and there's only 10 games and there's a week in between every game, right? So will you pivot on things? Sure, but nothing major. That's the biggest difference I've noticed. And again, when I worked I just remember working as a salesperson, where we would have just everything laid out months in advance, so we knew what was coming at every single point. That's because there's no games coming in and out, right? In the NBA, right, you might have a month where you have 13, 14 games, right? You're halfway through the month and whatever you're doing is not working. You have to pivot. You have to do it. It's your responsibility as a leader to come up with a different strategy that's going to work, right? So there's a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more nimble in the NBA. And when I made the transition selling in the NFL to the NBA, to Madison Square Garden, I think that was something that was a shock to me, where I was like, wow, we literally said that we were going to do this, and then 2 weeks later we're just scrapping it. But as I gained experience, I realized, like, you have to be able to do that as a leader, and you have to be able to sell that to your team, because it can be stressful to say we're doing this, and then 2 weeks later, no, we're not doing this, we're doing this instead. And if you don't know how to communicate and be transparent about it with your team, it can cause production to suffer. It could cause morale to suffer. It can cause your credibility to suffer. So I realized, like, being transparent and communicating with your team consistently on strategic changes or adjustments is important.
And being able to maintain flexibility and be nimble
Mm-hmm.
is definitely important in this industry. I want to talk a little bit about, a change that you made as you moved into your role in Brooklyn. Your background, you talked about, is very heavy within sales, but
Mm-hmm.
you took on leadership of a service team in Brooklyn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're continuing to lead service there in Denver. What challenges, if any, did that present to you without having ever really played an active service role yourself?
Yeah, that was obviously I was in the service role in Brooklyn for about a month and a half before I made the move here. So I didn't get to implement a lot, to be honest, but I think that what I did is focus on, well, one, what do I bring from the sales perspective that we can implement on the service side, right? So I knew there were certain strategic things that I wanted to do, how to set up renewals, how to kind of mirror the sales process and a renewal process, and really communicate that with the team and giving them a systematic process to do this. So I thought that was something that I could do easily, where I had to identify where were my potential blind spots or my potential pitfalls, right? And I think where I realized, like, where I'm really strong in sales is because I did it for such a long time that I know instinctually what can come around the corner. If we do X, how are people going to react? I don't know the same on the service side, right? So I had to do a lot. I had to do a lot of reading, a lot of networking with people that have been in those situations. A lot of, like, talking to the team itself, right? Like, what have you been dealing with, and really learn, right? Like, how can I support them and put them in a good position? I did I listened to a lot of, like, blogs, like video blogs, from different companies in the software industry, because we're getting sold software all the time, right? And so I was like, what do they do? What are some of their strategies for servicing and for renewals, and how do they set up their system? And I tried to learn as much as I could, to the point that, like, at this point, obviously I'm overseeing now the suite service, which is, a big chunk of of money, I feel pretty comfortable in how to strategize that, but I'm still leaning on my reps. They're very experienced, they're very strong at what they do. So I think being humble enough to understand that they probably know more than me in certain areas and lean into them to help us make decisions together. I'm not gonna gain that experience in those instances that they have. I'm just not at this point in my career unless I go back and do their role. So how can I use my team for us to be the best possible or the most effective team possible?
Well, I would suggest that goes back to your leadership philosophy and how you've approached previous roles as a leader, right? You're taking what's worked for you as a leader, the leadership style that you've developed through sales, and you're taking that and just applying those same principles to this role, right? Walking in, being humble, and understanding that you may or may not be the smartest person in the room, but it's important to value the opinions and perspectives and the expertise of the folks on your team.
Yeah, no, I think it's funny. I heard a previous leader say that you always become the manager that you wish you had, like that perfect version. And I'm not perfect by any means. I definitely make mistakes, but I think that was one of the things that that's one of the things that I try to do is like, at this point, I haven't sold like on a day-to-day basis for 7-8 years now. Like my salespeople are probably sharper than me, and their instincts are sharper than mine are, right? Like, do I have more experience and can I help them in certain areas? Yeah, but like it'd be I think my ego is not big enough to say like, oh no, I know better than you, right? Like you're on the phone, you're talking to people, like, what do you think about this decision, right? Like, or do you have a different opinion? Please challenge me, right? Like I love getting in debates with my team because that's how I also get better in my role, right? Like how can I learn from them and get better at leading and again making sure that I'm empowering them to make some of the decisions themselves.
Awesome. All right, last question for you. This is the one that I like to finish the conversations with. Herman, you're going to be getting a big promotion all the way up to president of the sport industry, not just the Broncos, not just the NFL, but the entire industry. And along with that, you get a magic wand that allows you to make any single change to the industry that you want. It's a change that happens overnight. It's not one that takes time, takes an adjustment. It's one that happens immediately. A lot of power.
Yeah.
What change are you making and why?
I think this one's one that I've been in organizations that are trying to do a good job and have improved a lot, and the industry as a whole has improved a lot. But honestly, recruiting and making sure that we're being intentional and diversifying the workforce in the industry, improving, representation, improving, pay from like equal pay among genders and things like that. Like it's improving a lot, but I'd love for the industry to be even more intentional in terms of their recruiting, not just because it's the right thing to do. While it is, right, like, and I'm a minority myself, but I've been on teams where I was the only person that spoke Spanish, and I've been the only person that's had my background, and I can be uncomfortable sometimes. It takes a lot more to like create relationships because I don't have as many things in common with people. Now again, it's gotten a lot better. Like I don't feel that as much, but I would say making sure that we're way more intentional with where we're finding candidates. How are we going out to other majors, for example? Like, a lot of people focus on like sport management majors. What are other majors that maybe don't even realize that this is a career, and how are we getting in front of them to let them know that this is a career? I think we already have a bad stigma from a sales perspective, like sales. No, I don't even want to hear about it. How can we educate people on like how rewarding and how fantastic this career is? Again, I think there's been plenty of progress made. Like I think the NBA does something. The Future Stars program is fantastic. What they do with what Mike Taylor's done with that program, what they did last year with that. So it's happening, but I'd love for it to happen a lot faster for sure.
You ever hired anybody with a psychology degree for a sales role?
Actually, I don't think so. Or not that I'm aware of. No.
And when I hear you talk about other degrees of the programs, I think it's easy to talk about communications and general business. but I had a class one year that was 3 people with psychology backgrounds, and I was so impressed with the way they were able to just connect with people and impact and have just the way they were able to just be in tune with understanding and identifying where people were, what they wanted, where they were coming from. So I started looking for a lot more psychology majors. But I love that, Herman, and I think it's so important to, we see it a lot, and we see it a lot more frequently at that entry level spot.
Correct.
But if it's only inside sales, if it's only entry level roles where you're being intentional about pipelining, about diversifying your candidate pool, then your organization starts to take a very obvious shape and structure, and that presents a whole different set of challenges, right? So you need to make sure, whether you have a recruiting manager or whether you have hiring managers who are active in recruiting, or whether you're utilizing outside recruiters, that this process is being done at all levels, whether it's AEs, whether it's, sales leaders, whether it's other departments, and just ensuring that there's intentionality throughout your hiring process organization wide, and not just at that inside sales level.
No, absolutely. And again, it's not just because it's the right thing to do, but from a business perspective, when you have a more diverse team, and again, diversity of thought and ideas, different ideas come up, and different perspectives come up, and ideas, iron sharpens iron, right? So ideas that might have been born this and everybody agrees, and it just becomes that. But maybe you have somebody that's like, oh, well, maybe we can improve this thing and make it even bigger or even better. If you don't have a diverse team, that doesn't happen. So from a business perspective, is actually it makes more sense to have a diverse team, just because you become a more
from so many different angles, right? I mean, look at a market like, I'm sitting here in Portland, Oregon, and I was a part of why it was so important for us. Portland is a rapidly growing, rapidly changing city. We want salespeople who can connect with that rapidly changing market and changing fan base. If I go out and I hire from University of Oregon sport marketing program, great program, nothing against them, but if every single person on our sales team is from that same program with that same background or very similar background, then you're not going to be able to have that diversity of people, backgrounds, voices, experiences who can connect with the changing marketplace.
Correct. No, 100%. So that would be
no shade to U of O. I may be a Beaver fan.
Yeah, of course.
But
no, absolutely. No, there's some great programs out there that really, actually, they focus on that too, right? Like they focus on diversity really, really early. But yeah, that would be the change that I would make if I could just wave a magic wand and make it tomorrow.
Love that. I think that's a great change. Well, Herman, thank you again so much for taking some time with me. Good luck to y'all in your game this upcoming weekend. I know the season comes very, very fast, especially in that division.
It's already week 3. I can't believe it. I just got here and it's already week 3. So no, I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me again, Joe. It's, I'm looking forward to hearing your future episodes too.
And then everybody out there, thank you for spending some time listening, whether it's this morning or this afternoon for you. Thank you for spending some time with us. And as always, if you know anybody, if you're connected to anyone in your network who is exceptional in their industry like Herman is, please send them my way.